Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker-Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process in discussions between the authors, narrators, producers, and post-production teams that bring them all together, as well as guests who have listened to the audiobooks and have questions for the creative teams. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I have with me Darren Speers, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Authors Republic. And Authors Republic at Pro Audio Voices is our digital distributor of choice, helping us get our clients' audiobooks out to the widest possible audience. Darren, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me once again.
Today, we're going to go into the weeds. We're going to really dig into the royalties question because a lot of our clients have questions about exactly how does this all work. And I know it can be really confusing. So before we dive in, I just want to kind of make a note about goals and impact, because certainly for most of the authors that we work with, royalties are typically not the most important goal. Most often, while royalties are important, they're driven more by the desire to have an impact and to really be found by their target audience so that they can do that. One of the many reasons that we work with you guys at Authors Republic is because you're helping our authors with to reach over 50 channels out there in the world, internationally, and that means a lot to us, being able to help our clients have an impact. I know that is important for you guys as well.
Absolutely.
So that said, let's start with sort of on a broader scale, like the categories of audiobook channels. What are some of those different types of distribution platforms you're working with?
It's all over the place now. I mean, we had digital retail. We just go traditional, credit, one book, one credit type of systems, your audiobooks.com, your audibles. That's slowly branched out into libraries, like with Overdrive, who will sell bulk packages of your audiobooks. So you retain a much higher revenue per unit. But that's because they're selling it as a bulk. And then there's Hoopla, who would be more of a rental platform where it's library technically, but it's a rental. So you get less revenue per unit, but then the customer never actually owns the book. They would return it. And then we find that you get a lot more units sold. I mean, like exponentially more units sold, even though the revenue per unit is lesser than you might see with an Overdrive sale. That moved into what we call pay per listen, this was a way of some of our retail platforms trying to find how they can have an unlimited type of model where people can just consume books as they please without having the problem of, I call it the Netflix syndrome, where you watch the first 5 minutes and then you move on to something else, 5 minutes, something else. And by the end of the day, Netflix has been charged for 50 movies where you've only watched, 5 minutes each. Right. So the way of doing that was to chunk up how you consume the audio into, like with Storytel, it would be like a 20%. So you'd be listening into 20% chunks, and then every 20% consumed would be 20% of what the book, the MSRP of the book. So if somebody listens to all of it, you'd get your full 100% royalty. But if they only listen to 20%, then you get the 20%. That's the way of, so far, what seems to be the most successful way to handle an unlimited model. Then this has moved into music channels, which is fairly new for us. This has been another very high unit sold with low revenue per unit, which makes sense if you think of its unlimited model. It's meant for music. People are just cycling through track after track after track. It might be something where they just have it playing all day. and they might not even be home. Like, I remember a lot of time having friends who just have music playing all day and they wouldn't even be in the room. And the same goes for audio when we fit into there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's as far as we are now. There's no new revolutionary partner or retailers on the market since getting Spotify and the music channels in there. But if they do, then we'll be sending your books there.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of any kind of like percentage, or do the bulk of audiobook listens or happen in any of those particular channels, or how does that spread work?
You could address this from a few different angles. You could say, from a market share perspective, Audible is still number one by our title data anyway, but that is decreasing quite a bit every year. In fact, we see if you were to combine, just for our numbers, of course, the library channels together, like Hoopla and Overdrive, you actually have the same market share as Audible as far as our sales numbers go, which is such a vast change from even let's say it's 3 years ago, where they clearly owned 90% of the market, but now we see it much closer to around 60%. Just based on our sales data, of course, which is great, because as you see more, you see less market share for them. There's an explosion of new retail partners, and that's how we can go from having maybe 7 in 2016 to over 50 a few years later.
Right.
So as far as distribution of sales, we still see that Audible produces the most sales for us just because of market share. But it's very close with the other library channels being added into it. We actually found that if you were to have your book go exclusive through ACX, you would have lost 60% of your revenue just because you're not going everywhere else. So it's a loss, a massive loss.
Yeah.
So that's the one angle as far as market share. The other one would be the genre of your book. That matters a lot. If we're looking at libraries like Overdrive, we notice a lot of nonfiction or classic literature and just magically sells like a couple months before schools are getting ready to give books to their kids, right? So but then the sales will drop off until next year when they spike again. We'll see that in Scandinavia. We find that English romance sells very well, English fiction in general, and that's because they use it as a learning tool to learn English.
Yeah.
So it's just really interesting when you look at like all the different demographics of consumers and how that relates to sales. But it's pretty well all over the place. Audible's still number one. Depending on the time of the year, if it's a library channel, you'll make more if you had books that kids might read, or otherwise it's a lot of pretty much the same sales across the board as far as like with genres and all that. There's no real giant change outside of the ones I mentioned.
A question just occurred to me that I hadn't thought about before, and just wondering, I know that especially with COVID, that there has been a lot of growth in terms of private platforms for content that's appropriate for kids. And just checking, but do you have access through your distribution model to any of those kinds of networks?
I'd have to know the name. Like, do you have a specific example?
I don't. I will have to look into that and then ask that question again.
Well, I'll let you know once I know.
Yeah. And then the other one that comes to mind is in terms of the like talking books for the blind, where it's content that can be provided for free to those who are visually impaired through that program. Do you have a channel or an access point with that particular audience? I'll say. When I say audience, that's probably the wrong word. I'm thinking more about their distribution channel than I am about the audience themselves.
So are you saying more from a consumer's perspective, where somebody who is visually impaired would find audiobooks?
Yeah, I guess I'm specifically talking about like Library of Congress has the Talking Books for the Blind program, where they're providing content, to a very targeted audience. And I don't think that's something that I've seen that you're currently doing, but I just thought I would ask that question.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that we're necessarily trying to build out. This would be more if we have even one of our retail partners that is trying to help that consumer base or provide a service for them that would be unique to them, that wouldn't be as needed by, I guess, normative vision, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Then we would abide by what they need and make sure that the content we distribute to them is formatted in a way that would make it easy for them to service visually impaired people. So we're the distribution side, right? When the retailers tell us what they need, we give them what they need. And if we find one that is trying to help people that are visually impaired or any kind of impairment like that, then we will manipulate our data to make sure that it gets there. So
yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Speaking of manipulating data, I remember when we had you on the show before that we talked about some of these, the models of, I'll say distribution. That might be the wrong word. Trying to choose the right words here. And you touched on this a little bit when you were talking about chunking down the segments for the unlimited listening experience. So we've got subscriptions, we've got one-off purchases that could be part of a subscription, I guess, or not. Music channels. Can you tell us any more about how some of these channels require you to change the data, the audio files, so that they work for that model?
Yeah. So for the most part, we don't touch your audio, especially the content. We would never touch the content of your audio files. We might tweak some things if it means getting the technical specs right, but that would be something as small as the bit rate is too low. We up the bit rate, little things like that. But we really try not to do anything because that's your artwork, and that we'll sell it as you think it should be sold. As far as chunking tracks go, this is something that is exclusive to the music side. And that it's basically Spotify was not meant to be an audiobook platform when they built it. I mean, I know they're doing, they take them now. Obviously, we distribute there. But it was meant as music. So you would never see a song that's, 120 minutes long, like you might see an audiobook track that is. So because of that, the way their revenue model goes is they pay you per track listened. So if we were to take a 10-hour audiobook where each track is an hour, that would make us no money. And our customer would be very angry. But what happens is those tracks are segmented where each track is a couple minutes long. And then your 10-track audiobook turns into hundreds of tracks for your audiobook. From a consumer perspective, they would have no idea that it's segmented. It's just top to bottom. You can see the tracks, obviously. You can see this is chapter 1. Track 1 of 50. You could see that as a customer, so you can cycle through what you want to see. But if you were to close your eyes and listen to the whole thing, there'd be no interruption. It doesn't hurt the quality whatsoever, and that's very important to us.
Right.
So that's the only place where that happens. What I was referring to before with chunking, like the 20% chunks, like with Storytel, that's more of a sales model. It doesn't actually impact the tracks themselves. It's just depending on what percentage of the book is listened to by the consumer will reflect the percentage of your total royalty.
Right. Okay, cool. So let's play with some numbers here, because I know this is where it can get, particularly confusing for folks. So let's just use $10 as a MSRP for an audiobook. Okay. Now, obviously obvious to me because you've also explained this to me, but there are many different percentages and models for the payment of those royalties, depending on the channel that we're talking about. So let's either sort of talk through a few of those, or really what I'm most interested in is sort of how it might play out in a particular model. So let's say we have, to keep it super simple, a $10 audiobook MSRP with a 10-hour audiobook length. What would an author expect in terms of royalties back in their account? With the different models.
Okay. Well, I guess it depends where it's purchased. This is why it gets
right.
It seems like it's dirty or something, but really it's just when you have 50 different channels all with their own models, there's no, you'd make $5 here. Oh, you would make $15 here, right? So let's just say with Overdrive, how it works essentially is, just before I get into Overdrive, whatever price you give us, 99.999% of the time we honor that. The only time we wouldn't is if you're clearly just, pulling our leg and you're like, my 5-minute children's book is worth $1,000 and I'm going to get rich from this. And we've had that.
Right.
That would be the only
Right.
time. But for the most part, our users are honest and they give a realistic price. And if they don't, we'll help them with that. So let's say you had a $10 audiobook and it's sold on one of our credit platforms. Of course, I can't say specifically what our royalty rates are. It's confidential. But on average, we usually secure a minimum of 50% with our partners. Mm-hmm. Fluctuates a little up and down depending on where you go, of course. And oftentimes it's even better than that.
Yeah.
So on Overdrive, that $10 sale would actually be sold at between 4 and 6 times higher because they're selling it as a bulk library deal, not a single unit. They're buying like a skid of them, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that would mean you would be getting 70% or 80%, depending on the client we have. Let's just say 70% of what that was sold for. So you might be expecting $3.50 if this was a regular sale where the retailer would take 50%. And then what's remaining of that is the 70% we give to you. So that would be $3.50. But then if it's being sold at $40, then you're making 4 times that amount. And you're still making the 70 or 80%, whatever the deal is you have with us.
Right.
But because it's a library channel, it would be much higher, an Overdrive library channel. If we looked at this from like a pay per listen channel that we like to call them, then it really depends on what percentage of the book they consumed. If they consumed 100% of it and it sold for $10, then you should expect your 70% still. It wouldn't make any difference. It would still be the $3.50, depending on our terms, of course. But if they only listen to first 20%, then you're only getting, then technically that is a $2 sale. And then you're making, I don't have a calculator in front of me, but smaller, right? It'd be 20%.
Right. Yeah.
If it's a Hoopla rental, then what they do is they take the MSRP that you give us, and then they fractionate it into, I'll have to look back, but I think it's like 20% of the MSRP we give them is what they put their price as, but that's because their consumers are renting it and they never own it. And then you get high volume, but lower revenue per unit. So you would look at things like that and you would think, wow, I'm making way less from Hoopla than I am from Overdrive. But what they're not understanding is that Overdrive is like a bulk sale where so Overdrive would be low quantity, but very high revenue per unit. And then Hoopla would be high quantity, low revenue per unit. So it really fluctuates depending on where it's going. But for the most part, as far as market share goes, it's still credit systems at the top. We'll see for how many more years that is. And if it's a credit type purchase, then you should be seeing $3.50 per $10 sale. Mm-hmm. And that would be pretty reliable.
Yeah, cool. And just to clarify, because I know this is that one of those points where people get confused, and to explain my understanding of why it needs to be expressed this way, the 70% of the royalties, so that's the amount that comes through from that sale. So the retailer, library, whoever that is running that platform or their channel needs to retain their piece because they're doing a lot of work on their part, the actual getting it to the customer.
Yes.
And then you, Authors Republic, is taking from that amount that comes back from the retailer, let's say, you're taking a piece to cover the work that you're doing, which is all of this, the establishing the connections with the different channels, maintaining those, modifying, when I say modify, like segmenting, for example, with the music channels, all of this behind the scenes work, managing customer relations, all of these things to cover your piece. And so that 70% then is 70% of the amount that's coming from those external channels.
Yes, it's 70% of our revenue from your audiobook.
Right. Yeah. And needs to be expressed that way because every channel is going to be delivering differently, different models, and thus. So I just wanted to clarify that because I think that is often a real confusing point for people.
It is, and it's hard to even explain unless you're somebody that's like yourself. You understand these things, but to people that don't really get it, they're like, well, why I'm selling my book for $10? Why did I only get $1.50 royalty? It's like, oh, well, that went through a library rental channel. That's actually pretty good for that. Like that's higher than the average for that. And then they'll see next week or next month it'll be, wow, I made $30 off of one unit. I only want to put my book there. But then they only get 5 units sold a month, and you got to do like the whole picture. You got customers all over the place who are subscribed to different models. And we find getting your book out there across the board is the best way to make the most money.
Right. Yeah. And to reach the widest audience as well.
Exactly.
Which is great.
And if that wasn't true, our company wouldn't exist. Yeah. Because we're only taking 30% of the revenue that we make, right? And if it wasn't successful the way that I'm describing it, you wouldn't be successful with 30% revenue. I can tell you that much.
Right. That's right. Yeah, it's a real testament to the work that you're doing. And I think it's helpful, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on to talk about this issue, is I think it's really helpful for authors to try to, at least to begin to get a sense of the kind of work that goes into this part of the process, that there's a lot to it. I know we certainly experience with audiobook production many times at the end of a project or even partway into it, an author will go, wow, I had no idea there was so much that went into this whole audiobook production process, So I think it's helpful.
It's a little more complicated than just talking into a mic for 6 hours, isn't it?
Right. Yes, absolutely. and the distribution's more complicated than just uploading a file somewhere. That it's so much more than that. So,
but you know what? I almost take it as a compliment or if we have people that think they should be making 95%, like, oh, you're just distributing. It's like, well, I'm glad your experience was so simple with us that you think it's that easy.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
That's what we tried to do.
Right. Yeah, it's like the actor on stage, don't want to show your craft. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would you say that of the different types of channels that the audiobook, that there is a particular model or type of retailer / library music channel that where audiobooks sell the best?
So best as in most revenue generated?
Yeah.
In total?
Yeah, we'll use that
as everybody's favorite month?
Yeah.
Geez, even that's a complicated question because, what's the language of the book? What's the genre? Have you put in promotions? Is there marketing? And, if there's, let's just say we're just going to base level, completely blank slate, no marketing, genre is going to be called X.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Duration is just typical 6 to 8 hour book. Even that is hard to answer.
I think even just what you said in terms of like looking at those parameters is enlightening because what we're seeing is all of these factors are playing into the success of any audiobook and where it's going to sell the most. Do you find that there are audiobooks that do best on some of, channels like the music channels?
Yeah, we found that so some of our own productions that we have that we own rights for, they were books that were or recommended readings during the Black Lives Matter movement. And it turns out that demographic was heavily on Spotify. And we noticed that book, those books doing pretty well through the year and then boom to the top, but primarily only on Spotify because that's where those customers were.
Yeah.
So we can't always predict a protest or anything like that to help with sales. But that's what I'm talking about when I say it's so hard to tell you where the best place is. That book didn't do very well on, Audible or audiobooks.com, but on Spotify, it just sold through the roof. So if you were just to look at that book and assume that every other book would trend just like that one would, so, no, that's not the case. Like we have some books that sell incredibly well on Hoopla and on other platforms. And then you can take a book by the same author, similar genre, similar story, And then suddenly it sells incredibly well on audiobooks.com, not through any promotions or anything. It just happens the people there, their customer base likes it. And then it doesn't do as well on Audible or something like that. It's really all over the place. And that's why I say, like, people that sign up with us, give it a good 4 to 6 months to really see what's going on. I mean, in that amount of time, your book should be everywhere. Most of our retail partners will have it up within a couple of weeks, but some of the smaller ones that just can't handle the load that we distribute to them, it might take them a month or a month and a half. But that's, 4 to 6 months should give you a good idea of where your book is going to perform the best.
Great. Let's pause for a moment. We'll be right back.
Looking for a way to get some direction and help with building your author platform and marketing your books and audiobooks? Pro Audio Voices created the Audiobook Marketing Program to help authors like yourself get the support they need at an affordable rate. We work with you to bring your goals together with our marketing expertise to create a customized blueprint, the tools and materials to build your platform, step-by-step instructions, and the team to help you all along the way. For more information, visit proaudiovoices.com and click on Audiobook Marketing Program. Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing.
Let's talk a little bit about some marketing questions. So one is, once they've waited those 4 to 6 months, and how would they find the information about where their audiobook is selling best at that point?
So we report monthly, and that would probably be your best way to see, like, oh, hey, Hoopla loves my book, or platform X really likes this book. It doesn't perform as well on this model. And that's actually one point I should bring up is books that are shorter duration don't do as well on credit-based systems. And that's because if you're paying $14.99 a month, you're not going to buy, Billy Goes to School. You're going to be buying, Game of Thrones or something that's really worth that $14.99. And then on the other hand, those smaller books sell very, very well on Hoopla because it's an easy rental. It's not costing them almost $15 just to listen to a 5 to 10 minute book.
Right. Which is also, sort of coming back to why it's so important to have this broad distribution, for authors who have shorter content. If they were to, say, go through ACX, for example, then, which is only Audible and iTunes, and they're going to have a subscription model for Audible, the exposure in the places where they're most likely to get their revenue won't be there.
Exactly. Yeah. Because customers looking for these types of books, they wouldn't do a credit-based system for this type of content.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I was actually looking at that very question, and thinking about what authors might choose as their MSRP. If they're in a range where it makes sense to have it at, let's say that we look at the numbers and we say, we think most likely Audible would sell it for, $13.95, right? Do you have thoughts on strategies for what you might recommend in terms of whether they actually put the MSRP at the $13.95 they think Audible might sell it for, or maybe push it up to $14.95 so that it is right in that slot where the where the subscription model lands?
If your goal is to maximize revenue from subscription models, then pricing your book higher makes sense. If, let's say, on audiobooks.com, your book is $100, a customer is not seeing $100. They're seeing this book costs 1 credit.
Right.
So if your goal is to maximize revenue from credit-based systems, then jacking up your price that's a viable strategy. It just means you're going to be doing far worse on every other type of revenue model or sales model.
Right.
Like on like a storytell model in like the chunks of 20%. If somebody's going to listen to 20% of your book, which might just say be 2 hours, and you've priced it at $50 or something, they're not going to take that gamble of paying that much money for that. They're going to look more towards something cheaper. So Like again, it just gets into there's no really one good answer. And this is a good thing in a sense, because if there was one good answer, like there was a few years ago where Audible was king, this is where we should go, then yeah, price your books towards what would maximize revenue from Audible. But with their market share declining, it makes no sense to do that anymore, unless you have some specific deal with them where they're going to promote the hell out of your book.
Right.
But usually that's something that a publisher would get, like Random House might get something like that, part of their deal with them,
Right.
with their old grandfathered publishing or agreements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. And then let's say, because if let's say that we have an author who is, we're watching our royalties, we're watching to see those over those 4 to 6 months where they're coming in, and we determine, it's almost all subscription based, or it's almost all music channels, and we decide that that looks like almost all the revenue is coming in from this direction. I want to really focus on that, and maybe it would help if I modified my price. So how easy is it for an author to change their pricing once an audiobook is already live? And how long does that take to actually implement out through the channels?
So it's pretty quick. All you have to do is let us know you want to make changes. We open your book up to be edited. You can change whatever you like, including the price. You resubmit it, and all we do is we send an updated metadata feed to all of our partners, which is ingested into our channel system much faster than if audiobooks were accompanying it, because then it's just a metadata sheet. They just throw it right into their system. Most of our distribution settings are manipulated in a way where it's exactly what our retail partners want. It's not, we wish it looked like this, but we're just going to give you our own Authors Republic spreadsheet.
Yeah.
No. If you want Onyx 2.0, you're getting Onyx 2.0. If you want a custom spreadsheet that only you use, which by the way is really annoying for us, then we'll do that, because we're just these lovable kids that do whatever you need. So it's pretty quick, and it would,
no, it's okay.
Finish up. Changes can be anywhere from 48 hours to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's not us. We usually get it distributed out within hours of you changing it. That would just be depending on how fast our partners are to flip it over to a new price.
Right. And I just wanted to highlight again, that additional stuff that's behind the scenes that people aren't aware of what you're doing, and how that's a big part of it. If someone wanted to try to do this themselves with all these different channels, first of all, I don't even know if that's possible. Secondly, and I would never recommend that.
Anybody that thinks it's easy, I will auto forward all of my emails for the next month. They can handle that, and then we'll see what they have to say.
Right. Great. And then I think the other thing that I wanted just to bring up for our listeners is we've talked a little bit about marketing and how important that is. And you and I have talked over, I don't know, it's probably been several years now, about different ways that we can work together to help authors with their marketing, with their productions. So I just want to use this opportunity to let our listeners know that we are going to be open. Let's see, how shall I say it? We'll be launching. We kind of are already launched, but it's almost like a second launch on our audiobook marketing program. That is where, in partnership with you, we'll be able to offer to your clients, the very best deal so that they can get the most results out of their audiobook distribution.
Yeah, exactly. We have always tried to fill that gap of marketing. Marketing is something for a company to do is quite expensive, especially when you have tens of thousands of audiobooks and people that all want their book marketed in the same way for free.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So having a partner like you guys will go a long way, because we can handle all the distribution, make sure the book's everywhere, and then you guys have a great way of getting that book not just in front of people's eyes, but in the right eyes.
Right.
That matters a lot. You could spend $1 million on marketing, but if it's not to the people that are actually interested in that product, then there's no point of spending it.
Exactly.
And that's where you guys will come in and help. And we don't have anything official quite yet.
Right.
But we are very excited to start working together on this to provide more value to our users.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I love having you on the show and chatting with you about these kinds of things. I think it's just so great for our authors to be able to get a peek, behind the scenes on what's going on with distribution and how that works, and some of the things that they need to be aware of when they're stepping into that part of the process. So, again, Darren Speers from Authors Republic. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Well, thanks for having me, and I look forward to the next one.
Sounds good. Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.